Thank you, Mr. Porter. Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Sabbath. Nice to see you all here. Well, after visiting Turkey and seeing the 7 churches of Revelation, I'm here looking at one church. So young in comparison. No ruins here, right? Y'all look great, and we're happy to be back here with you all on this fine Sabbath day. While touring the 7 churches in Turkey and some of the other places we visited, our tour guide, whose name was Levent, issued us listening devices that connected wirelessly to a microphone he wore around his neck. This made it very easier for him to communicate and talk to us as our large group strolled around the ancient cities. So 54 of us, with an earbud in an ear, followed our guide while listening to his commentary as we explored Turkey. If we got too far behind or a little outside the group, automated message would come over the listening device that said, "Please follow up." Now, Kimberly and I found this interesting because here in America we'd probably say, "Please catch up," right? You're falling behind. So I looked up this phrase "follow up" to see if there was actually a link to how they were using it. So I looked it up in Merriam-Webster.com, and it gave 3 definitions of the verb form of follow up. The first definition is to follow with something similar, related, or supplementary, which could be like following up our convictions with like-mindedness with Christ, maybe. The second one was to maintain contact with a person, which we did, so as to monitor the effects of earlier activities or treatments. And the third one I thought was really relevant, to pursue in an effort to take further action. An example would be like following Christ closely so we can make the right changes in our lives. So follow-up isn't a phrase we typically use to draw closer, but maybe we should. Maybe we should explore that a little bit more, and that's what I intend to do here this afternoon. So we should basically follow up in our spiritual lives. We are called to follow Christ, follow His Word, and follow everything He tells us to do. Basically pursue and maintain contact, right? Christ tells us in John chapter 12, verse 26, "If anyone serves me, let him follow me. And where I am, there my servant will be also. If anyone serves me, him my Father will honor." Ephesians 5:1 tells us, "Therefore be imitators of God as dear children." Being an imitator really is just following an example, right? 1 Peter 2, verse 21 says, "For to this you were called, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us as an example, that you should follow His steps." So we are to follow up with our leader and spiritual guide in Jesus Christ. We trusted our tour guide completely, as he knew where we were going, what our timing needed to be in each area we visited, and how each day was scheduled out. So we all followed him faithfully. I feel this is a great comparison to how we are to follow Christ with the most important aspect of our existence, our place in His family and His kingdom. To be good followers of Christ, we must be good listeners. It's essential to listen closely so that we stay on track and headed in the right direction, just as our group did. As baptized members of God's family, we have been blessed with the precious gift of the Holy Spirit, and should understand that the Holy Spirit is really God in us. But do we allow the Holy Spirit to lead us each and every day? We need to follow up with God and ask for specific things, for His help with life's decisions, with healing. We must listen closely for His answer in whatever form that may be, which could be an idea we get or from someone else, in a counseling session or reading the Bible. We should look and listen and never ignore derived thoughts from meditating and studying. Let's review an example of an Old Testament story that makes a very interesting point. So if you would turn to 1 Kings 19. 1 Kings 19, we'll start in verse 11. This is the story of Elijah, and we're going to kind of break into the account here. Then he said, "Go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord, And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great strong wind tore into the mountains and broke the rocks in pieces before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a still small voice. So it was, when Elijah heard it, that he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood in the entrance of the cave. And the story goes on where God gives him instruction to anoint Hazael as king over Israel, Jehu as king over Judah, and Elisha as his eventual replacement. So what I get from this account is that even though God is so powerful and mighty, he can use so many loud and obvious ways to communicate with us. I kind of get the impression maybe that's not his preference. Perhaps the all-powerful chooses to communicate things with us in a more quiet fashion. And I think for good reason that we'll explore. But he needs our focus on him to recognize when he is communicating with us. So, can we hear that still small voice or that whisper from our Father when the world is so noisy with plenty of distractions around us? This has certainly been a struggle for me at times. David gives us a great suggestion in Psalms 4, verses 4, where he says, "Be angry and do not sin. Meditate within your heart on your bed and be still, Selah." Of course, David didn't have social media on his phone, in his pocket, or anything like that, but I'm sure he had lots of people seeking him for advice or counsel or just wanting to be around him. In order to properly follow up, we must separate ourselves from all the noise and distractions for prayer and meditation and listen closely. In Turkey, I would sometimes have to push the little earbud in a little tighter or walk away from noise so that I could hear what our guide was telling us. And this was especially true in a busy, noisy city like Istanbul. So taking time to sit still, in quiet, and focus on God the Father, praying and meditating will give us the best chance of understanding what he wants us to do. This is how we can follow up with him. Psalm 46, verse 10 is one of my favorite scriptures, says, "Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth." Furthermore, being a good listener involves completely understanding the instructions given. We are to be doers, not just hearers. We have to carry out the instructions given us, even if we aren't very fond of them. At the end of each day's tour, our guide would tell us what the plan was for the next day. And he would actually refer to himself as evil event when he broke the news that our wake-up calls would come at 6 a.m. He'd get grumbles in the bus, and that we needed to be on the bus so the wheels on the bus could turn at 7:30. So we needed to get an early start for a long day. However, we all listened. We complied cheerfully, and we were all on the bus at 7:30 every day. James reminds us of how important it is to be a doer and not just a hearer in James 1, verse 21. So if you turn to James 1, starting in verse 21, it says, "Therefore lay aside all filthiness and overflow of wickedness, and receive with meekness the implanted word which is able to save your souls. But be doers of the word, and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. For if anyone is a hearer of the word, and not a doer, he is like a man observing his natural face in a mirror. For he observes himself, goes away, and immediately forgets what kind of man he was. But he who looks into the perfect law of liberty and continues in it, and is not a forgetful hearer, but a doer of the work, this one will be blessed in what he does." So to properly follow up, we must listen carefully and quietly, then carry out his instructions exactly the way he reveals it to us. Our trip to Turkey was a fabulous experience, full of fellowship and good food, beautiful landscapes, ancient cities rich in biblical history, Modern cities bustling with life, all creating fantastic memories and providing a wealth of education for all of us, even our tour guide, Levent. With all that, the simplest lesson is one that we must practice every day, brethren. That is to follow up with our guide, Jesus Christ, by listening for his instructions and doing what he tells us to do. This was exemplified perfectly by Jesus Christ as the disciples followed him around everywhere he went. And our trip was a nice reminder as 54 members of God's church faithfully followed a Turkish tour guide to the ruins of ancient biblical cities in Asia Minor. So, brethren, I urge you, please follow up.